Miss Ellis, what is this? I asked for the proposal for the new development. Oh, Mr. Grant, I'm so sorry. I'll get it right away. Amelia Ellis hurried out of the office and into her own workspace, frantically searching for the document Mark Grant needed. Having delivered the proposal, she stood quietly by, awaiting his instructions. What's on my schedule today? Mark Grant asked, still absorbed in his work. Amelia realized with a jolt that she had left her tablet, which she used for daily reports, outside. Her heart pounded in her chest. What's the matter? Mark Grant looked up, puzzled by her silence. Having been his secretary for 2 years, Amelia's ability to think on her feet was well honed. Drawing on her memory, she smoothly recited his schedule. At 10 a.m., you have a sales meeting. At 11 a.m., a meeting with Mr. Wong. Lunch with Miss Harper at noon? Suddenly, Mark Grant interrupted her, a hint of confusion in his voice. Lunch with Clara Harper again? Amelia froze. Her stomach dropped. That was yesterday's schedule. A light tapping sound drew her attention to the desk. Mark Grant was watching her with amusement. Miss Ellis, are you still asleep? A faint smile played on his lips. Amelia lowered her head and apologized softly. I'm very sorry, Mr. Grant. Don't be absent-minded at work, or I'll dock your pay. His voice turned serious. Amelia bit her lip. Don't let it happen again. Go back to work. Mark Grant returned to his files. Amelia glanced at him, then quietly retreated. Back at her desk, she slumped into her chair, exhausted. Last night's events had kept her awake, leaving her drained. She sighed deeply, trying to compose herself for the tasks ahead. Half an hour later, she listlessly put down her work, her mind replaying the previous night. As usual, Amelia went straight home after work. She took the elevator upstairs and unlocked her door. From the bedroom came the sound of heavy breathing. She stood frozen, a wave of emotions washing over her. For 3 years, this apartment had held only her presence. Their marriage was a hollow ritual. 3 years of silence, a cold war with no end in sight. Her husband, Daniel's, coldness and rejection, her own helplessness and forbearance, had left deep scars on this empty space. She had hoped time would bridge the gap between them, but reality had proven her wrong. Without communication, without understanding, their marriage was a desolate wasteland. Tonight, Daniel seemed to have crossed a line. He had brought someone home. Amelia remained motionless until the sounds from the bedroom ceased. A few moments later, Daniel emerged, looking refreshed. He paused when he saw her. Since you're back, I don't need to call you. Snapped out of her reverie by his voice, Amelia finally looked at him. We've been married for 3 years. We should have a child. His words stunned her into silence. Daniel walked over to the sofa and sat down, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Don't worry, you'll always be the wife. No one will replace you. My child will be born from you. Daniel, are you being serious? Anger flared within her. Amelia, which man doesn't have a woman on the side? I'm just doing what a man does. Besides, you haven't agreed to share a bed with me these past 3 years, and I haven't complained. Can't I find someone else? Daniel's tone was indifferent. Amelia's anger intensified. Do you even know why I refused? The day before our wedding, you were out with another woman. So what? You still married me, didn't you? He sneered. Amelia froze, her teeth clenched. Had it been her choice? A childhood promise between their parents had bound them together. As time passed, the adults had forgotten. She had a crush. He had a girlfriend. It wasn't until Daniel's father fell gravely ill that their families resurrected the old agreement. Mr. Harrison, seeing Amelia as the ideal daughter-in-law, used his illness to coerce Daniel into marrying her. Forced to break up with his girlfriend, Daniel had spent the night before their wedding with another woman as a show of defiance. Amelia had wanted to call off the wedding, but her protests were futile. On their wedding night, she had banished him from the bedroom. He had simply scoffed and left the apartment. Amelia took a deep breath, feeling utterly worn out. This marriage was meaningless. She looked at Daniel. Let's get a divorce. He stared at her impassively. After a long silence, he spoke. Amelia, forget it. Daniel, a divorce would be good for both of us, Amelia replied calmly. It makes no difference to me, he scoffed. Amelia was speechless. He was right. Divorce wouldn't affect him much, but she didn't want to be trapped in this marriage forever. Just then, a woman emerged from the bedroom. Long, wavy hair cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a flowing dress, and a beautiful, delicate face held a faint smile. Daniel, I'm hungry. Let's go eat. Her voice was soft. Okay. Daniel stood up and offered his arm. The woman took it, and they walked towards the door. Amelia watched them disappear, feeling like a discarded clown. My, Miss Ellis, daydreaming on company time? A playful voice broke the silence of the office. Amelia looked up to see Finn Martin, from the legal department, standing before her. She startled, then stood up. Mr. Martin. Is Mark in? Finn asked. Mr. Grant is in, Amelia replied. Carry on then. Finn waved her back to work. Watching him go, an idea struck Amelia. She hurried after him. Mr. Martin, please wait, she called. Finn stopped and turned. Miss Ellis, what is it? Mr. Martin, are you free this evening? Are you asking me out? Finn raised an eyebrow. Amelia hesitated. Yes, I'd like to treat you to dinner. You want to treat me to dinner? Finn sounded surprised. Yes, I have some legal questions I'd like to ask you. What about? Can you give me a hint? Finn looked intrigued. Amelia frowned. Don't worry about it if it's inconvenient, Finn said, looking slightly disappointed. It's nothing inconvenient. I'll have to ask you sooner or later anyway, Amelia said. Finn waited for her to continue. Amelia hesitated, then finally spoke. It's about divorce. Divorce? A friend? Finn asked, surprised. No, me. Finn stared at her, speechless. Mr. Martin, are you free? Amelia asked again politely. Finn cleared his throat. The restaurant across the street, after work. A smile touched Amelia's lips. Okay, thank you, Mr. Martin. Finn glanced at her, then turned and walked straight into Mark's office without knocking. What brings you here? Mark Grant put down his files and looked up at the uninvited guest. As far as he knew, no one else dared enter his office without knocking. Finn walked to the desk and sat down, a sly smile on his face. I have 2 pieces of news for you, one good, one bad. Which do you want to hear first? Mark smirked. Look who's showing off. Finn's smile faltered. His expression became serious. The worker who was injured, his family is demanding a $5 million settlement, or they'll sue the company. $5 million? Mark scoffed. It was blatant extortion. If the man had died, he would have paid, but he was still in the hospital. If he set this precedent, there would be no end to the trouble. Finn frowned. Those unscrupulous real estate developers have alienated the entire city. After this incident, people aren't even bothering to find out the truth. They're just boycotting our new development. And the good news? Mark stood up and poured Finn a glass of water. Huh. Finn blinked. Mark looked at him expectantly. Finn grinned. Give me a raise and I'll tell you. Mark turned and sat back in his chair, his voice firm. The worker's case is your responsibility. If you don't handle it properly, he let the threat hang in the air, his gaze sharp. Fine, I'll tell you, Finn muttered. How was he, a lowly lawyer, supposed to solve this without his boss's backing? He glared at Mark. Such a sly fox. The door to the private dining room opened softly. Amelia looked up, about to speak, when Mark Grant walked in, followed by a cheerful Finn. Good evening, Miss Ellis. Hope you don't mind if I brought a friend. Caught off guard, Amelia stood up. Mr. Grant, Mr. Martin. She wouldn't dare object. This was her boss, after all. Offending him would mean losing her job. Nowhere else to eat, so I'm tagging along with Mr. Martin, Mark Grant said, settling into a seat. Amelia was stunned. Finn was speechless. The great Mr. Grant had nowhere else to eat? Mr. Grant, Mr. Martin, please order. Amelia offered the menu, feeling like a waitress. What do you like? Mark took the menu and looked up at Amelia. Whatever you order is fine with me, Amelia replied, trying to sound agreeable. Finn chuckled. Mark, sounds like you've been working Miss Ellis pretty hard. Mark frowned and pushed the menu back towards Amelia. You order. Mr. Grant, please, you go ahead, Amelia demurred. I said you order. His voice held a note of command. Amelia reluctantly took the menu and carefully chose a few dishes she knew Mark favored. She knew his tastes well, after all. Miss Ellis, since you've chosen, let me do the ordering, Finn smiled, taking the menu from her. 5 dishes for 3 people is enough, Mark said. Finn rolled his eyes inwardly. Amelia had invited him, and Mark, the uninvited guest, was acting like he owned the place. He put down the menu with a forced smile. Plenty, plenty. Mr. Martin, order a few more, Amelia urged. No, this is fine, Finn waved his hand dismissively. Amelia handed the menu to the waiter and turned to Finn with a smile. Mr. Martin, they have some very special wine here. Would you like some? He's driving. He can't drink, Mark interjected. Finn was speechless. Amelia stared at him. The dishes arrived shortly after. Finn took a bite and sighed contentedly. Thank you for the meal, Miss Ellis. It's my pleasure, Mr. Martin. I'm honored you could make it, Amelia smiled back. Finn sighed inwardly. The food was delicious, but it was a shame there was no wine to accompany it. He felt a nudge from the side and turned to see Mark looking at him expectantly. Something you need? Mark just stared. Finn glared at Mark, then turned to Amelia, who was lost in thought. With Mark present, she was unsure how to broach the topic of divorce. Finn cleared his throat. So, Miss Ellis, what is it you wanted to ask about divorce? The sudden question startled Amelia. Finn pressed on. You said you had legal questions. Is it about the division of assets? Amelia bit her lip, silent. Finn narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. Is he having an affair or refusing to divorce? He hit the nail on the head. Amelia was taken aback by his directness. After a moment's hesitation, she decided to be honest. My husband refuses to divorce. She didn't mention Daniel's infidelity, focusing on the core issue. Why? Finn's sharp gaze seemed to pierce through her. I don't know, she mumbled. Miss Ellis, if you don't tell me the truth, how can I help you? Finn sighed. Mr. Martin, I just want a divorce, as quickly as possible. Amelia looked up, her voice urgent. Miss Ellis, I need to know. Finn started, but Mark cut him off. You're a lawyer specializing in legal matters, and you can't even handle a simple divorce case? Maybe you should find another line of work. Finn was rendered speechless. It's like this, we have no feelings for each other. We've been sleeping in separate beds for 3 years. He's involved with other women. Amelia bit her lip, the words difficult to utter. Mark froze. Finn's jaw dropped. This was Amelia's marriage? Mr. Martin, can you help me? I'll pay your fees, Amelia pleaded. After dinner, Mark sent his driver to take Amelia home. In another car, Finn glanced at Mark in the rearview mirror. Do you think she's telling the truth? Mark was scrolling through his phone, his voice calm. You're a lawyer. Can't you find out yourself? Finn paused, a sly smile spreading across his face. Or maybe you could try? Mark glanced at him, his voice low. The time isn't right yet. Finn's eyes widened. He gripped the steering wheel, grateful he hadn't started driving yet. He might have driven straight into the curb. Mark, seriously? You, a prime bachelor, are going after a divorced woman? Mark looked out the window, silent. 5 years ago, he had accompanied his father to a university for a charity event. Amelia Ellis, a student representative, had given a speech. Mark, sitting in the audience, found his attention drawn to her. Her delicate features, her expressive eyes, the subtle touch of lipstick. She was captivating. Even after the speech, he remained entranced. His friend nudged him. Mark, old man, taken a fancy to her. Have we? Who? He seemed lost in thought. Who else? The student who just gave the speech. His friend chuckled. Mark frowned slightly, his gaze returning to Amelia, who was now chatting with someone in the audience. Let me tell you, her name is Amelia Ellis, and she's a brilliant student. Just not sure about her family background, whether she's a good match for you, Mr. Grant. His friend's voice was teasing. Mark slowly looked away and stood up. Hey, Mark, where are you going? His friend asked. For a smoke, he replied calmly. Can't you smoke here? He smiled. These are the future flowers of our nation. With that, he walked away, leaving his friend staring after him. Mark stood in a quiet corner of the campus, the red glow of his cigarette flickering. He inhaled, a plume of white smoke escaping his nostrils. Suddenly, a soft meow caught his attention. He turned to see a pure white cat staring at him, its eyes wide. In that instant, Amelia's face flashed through his mind. He scoffed at himself. He'd seen countless beautiful women, and yet he was captivated by a stranger. A gentle voice called out, Snowball, Snowball, where are you? Look what Mommy brought you. The cat turned and ran towards the voice. Mark, intrigued, extinguished his cigarette and followed. Oh, Snowball, where did you run off to? Amelia scooped up the cat. The cat nuzzled her hand affectionately. Meow. Snowball, look what Mommy brought you. Amelia pulled a treat from her bag. Is this your cat? Mark's voice startled her. Ah. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. Mark frowned. Was she always this easily startled? Amelia recovered quickly. Yes, he is. He stepped closer and crouched down, reaching out to pet the cat. The cat, however, swiped at his hand with its claws. Oh, Snowball, no scratching. Amelia caught the cat's paw. Mark looked at the scratch on his hand and smiled. Quite the feisty little fellow. He's not. He's usually very well behaved. Amelia protested, a hint of playfulness in her voice. Mark raised an eyebrow. That day, the young Mr. Grant spent his time playing with a cat alongside a woman he had only met once. He had thought she would be a fleeting memory. Instead, she lingered in his thoughts. He hadn't expected to develop such strong feelings for her. He spent the next 3 years abroad, sent there by his father. Upon returning, he immediately sought her out at the university. Fate, it seemed, had played a cruel joke. The day he finally saw her again, she was walking down the aisle, towards another man. He stood in the shadows, watching the woman who had captured his heart belong to someone else. He regretted not having acted sooner. What if he had taken her with him? Would she be his wife now? But they had barely met. Would she even have agreed to go with him? Hello? Earth to Mr. Grant? Finn turned around, seeing Mark lost in thought. Mark snapped back to reality. Drive, he said. Finn shrugged and started the car. Amelia Ellis, what do you think you're doing? Filing for divorce? Daniel's angry voice roared through the phone. Amelia covered the receiver and glanced around, then retreated to a corner. Daniel, let's just end this amicably. You wish, he spat. Daniel, what's the point of continuing this marriage? Amelia frowned. When you insisted on marrying me, did you ever think about this day? Daniel, it was your father who... Amelia started, but Daniel interrupted her. Don't try to twist things, Amelia. What do you mean? Amelia was taken aback. Daniel scoffed. It was your father who pressured my father into agreeing to the marriage. Otherwise, he wouldn't donate his bone marrow. Impossible, Amelia retorted. Ask your dear father. Daniel hung up. Amelia stared at the phone, stunned. Before leaving work, she called her father and confronted him directly. To her surprise, her father was calm, admitting the truth. He had been having an affair and had been discovered. He had paid the woman's husband off, but the cost had been crippling. When Mr. Harrison was diagnosed with leukemia, as a friend, he had volunteered to be tested and discovered he was a match. He had then seen an opportunity with the financially secure Harrison family and pressured them into the marriage. Later that afternoon, in Mark's office. What's wrong? Mark noticed Amelia's silence. He looked up. She was holding a document, her brow furrowed, lost in thought. She hadn't even heard him speak. Amelia, he called again. She snapped out of her reverie, freezing in place. Mark was standing right beside her, barely a step away. Her heart pounded in her chest. Tell me what's bothering you, Mark said, his gaze intense. Nothing. She hadn't slept well in days, her face pale. She forced a smile. I can help you, Mark insisted. She shook her head. Mr. Grant, if there's nothing else, I'll get back to work. Mark watched her as she hurried towards the door. Just as she reached for the handle, she realized she was still holding the document. Flustered, she placed it on his desk and turned to leave again. As she closed the door behind her, she let out a long breath. Mark frowned, picked up his phone, and dialed a number, his voice tight with displeasure. What's taking so long? What now? Finn groaned from the other end of the line. Amelia's divorce. Look, Mark, Daniel Harrison isn't easy to deal with. Finn complained. Find a way. Mark's voice was icy. I'm working on it. What's the rush? Mark hung up without another word. Finn stared at his phone, muttered a curse, and sat up in bed. 2 weeks later, outside the registry office, Amelia stood in a daze. She couldn't believe Daniel, who had been so adamant against divorce, had given in so easily. She mechanically filled out the divorce application and signed her name. Miss Ellis, you can collect your divorce certificate in a month, Finn reminded her gently. Amelia felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, uncertainty. To expedite the divorce, she had agreed to leave with nothing. She didn't even have a place to live now. As if sensing her predicament, Finn spoke again. Miss Ellis, I've applied for the company's housing assistance program for you. Housing assistance? Amelia was surprised. She'd never heard of such a program. It's a special benefit for employees facing difficulties, Finn explained. Do I qualify? She asked hesitantly. Absolutely. Miss Ellis, we're here. Finn parked in front of an apartment building. Amelia looked over. Finn got out of the car and retrieved her suitcase from the trunk. Amelia hurried out. Mr. Martin, let me take that. Finn chuckled and waved her off. I wouldn't dream of letting you carry such a heavy suitcase. His voice was warm and kind. Gratitude welled up inside Amelia. Thank you so much, Mr. Martin. They entered the apartment. Amelia stood in the bright, spacious living room, looking around. The apartment was clean and tidy, with a welcoming atmosphere. Finn put down the suitcase and pointed to a bedroom. This is your room, Miss Ellis. The other one is occupied by another employee, but she's been transferred out of town and hasn't cleared her things out yet. Okay. Miss Ellis, I have to go now, Finn said. I'll see you out. Don't bother. You have to unpack. I'll see myself out. He turned and left. Downstairs, a black car was waiting. Finn got into the back seat. All done. Mark looked up from his files and glanced at him. Thank you. Finn blinked, surprised. Mark, you actually said thank you. Mark smirked and addressed his driver. To the office. Yes, Mr. Grant. Amelia was reporting Mark's schedule for the day. And for the business gala this evening, Mr. Grant, which female companion should I arrange for you? Mark paused, a slight smile playing on his lips. You. Amelia froze. After a moment, she stammered, Mr. Grant, you're joking. I couldn't possibly be your companion. Why not? He raised an eyebrow. I'm not suitable, Amelia hesitated. How do you know if you don't try? It's settled. That afternoon, Amelia couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about the gala, what to wear, what to say. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up to see Mark standing there. She scrambled to her feet. Mr. Grant. Let's go. Amelia was taken aback. It was only a little past 5. The gala didn't start until 7. She watched him walk towards the elevator and grabbed her bag, hurrying after him. At 7 o'clock, Amelia, in a stunning gown, stepped out of the car behind Mark. She had never felt so beautiful. As they reached the hotel entrance, Mark stopped and turned to her, his gaze intense. Amelia, intimidated, looked down. He extended his arm. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Mr. Grant, you've arrived, someone greeted him, shaking his hand. And who is this lovely lady? I don't believe we've met. Amelia flinched, instinctively stepping behind Mark. He glanced at her, then introduced her. My wife. So, Mr. Grant is a married man. Amelia froze. She tried to pull her hand away, but Mark placed his hand on her waist and whispered in her ear, Don't move, unless you want to cause a scene. Mr. Grant, Your words might be misinterpreted, Amelia whispered back, worried. What's so wrong with me that you're so repulsed? His eyes held hers. Nothing's wrong with you, Mr. Grant, but I'm just a secretary. I prefer to keep a low profile at work and avoid any gossip. The gala was filled with company executives and senior managers. If word of this got back to the office, she wouldn't be able to handle the rumors. Mark gave her a look, released his hold, and walked into the ballroom. Amelia stood there, feeling lost and adrift. After a while, she retreated to a quiet corner. As his secretary, she rarely accompanied him to such events, let alone as his partner. Secretaries were often seen with their bosses, sometimes even sparking rumors, but that had never been the case with her. She had always respected Mark, but tonight, she felt a flicker of fear, even considering resigning. Miss Ellis, you found a good hiding spot. Finn approached with a glass of wine and a warm smile. Amelia looked up, relieved to see him. Mr. Martin, are you uncomfortable here, Miss Ellis? Finn asked, noticing her unease. Yes, it's my first time at an event like this, she admitted. That Mark, how could he leave you all alone? Finn frowned, looking towards where Mark was surrounded by a group of people. I'll go get him. He started to walk away. Mr. Martin, no, it's fine. Amelia called out, but he didn't seem to hear. Finn reached Mark and tapped him on the shoulder. Mark, what's the deal? You brought her here. Why aren't you with her? Mark glanced at Finn. She doesn't need me to accompany her. Finn paused, then looked in Amelia's direction before turning back to Mark. What happened? Did you get rejected? Mark swirled his wine. She's avoiding me. Finn blinked, then chuckled. Mark Grant, you're such a clueless man. Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased with the teasing. You have to be patient with women. When a woman says yes, she means yes. When she says no, she often means yes, too. Unless she's really angry when she says no, then it's a no. Finn launched into a lecture on the art of pursuing women. After the gala, Amelia followed Mark out to the car. The car stopped in front of her apartment building. Amelia touched the door handle. Mr. Grant, I'll get off here. Mark didn't respond, his eyes closed. She hesitated, then opened the door. Suddenly, a small, white blur rushed towards her, making her gasp. The sound made Mark open his eyes. Amelia looked down to see Snowball circling her legs, rubbing against her affectionately. Mark's eyes widened in surprise. Amelia was equally stunned. Snowball? How did you get here? She had left Snowball with the building superintendent at her university because her mother was allergic. Meow. Amelia stroked the cat's head. Mommy thought she'd never see you again. Mark walked over and crouched beside her, petting the cat. Snowball turned and swiped at his hand. Mark chuckled. Still feisty, I see. Doesn't even recognize his daddy anymore. Amelia stared at him, her eyes wide. The image of the man scratched by Snowball 5 years ago flashed through her mind. The man she had secretly admired ever since. It's you. It's me. Mark glanced at her, picked up Snowball, and walked towards the apartment building. Amelia followed, her heart fluttering. Snowball, do you know Mommy hates Daddy? What should Daddy do? Mark murmured to the cat. Snowball meowed again, looking curiously at Amelia. Amelia froze, then a bold idea struck her. She took the cat from Mark. Snowball, can you tell Mommy how you found Daddy? You can ask Snowball's daddy. Mark turned to face her. Amelia bit her lip, looking down. Amelia, be my girlfriend. Her heart skipped a beat. Her face flushed. After a long moment, she murmured, Snowball's hungry. Let's go home. Mark gazed at her, then pulled her into his arms and walked towards the apartment. This is your home? Amelia asked, surprised, as Mark entered the code and opened the door. Yes. The door swung open, and Snowball meowed, darting past Amelia and into the spare bedroom Finn had mentioned. Amelia paused, then followed the cat, standing at the threshold, looking around the room in confusion. From now on, this is our home, Mark whispered, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Amelia suddenly remembered her marital status. I'm divorced. I don't care, he murmured. Mr. Grant? She whispered, uncertain. Say my name, he said, looking down at her. Amelia looked up at him, really looking at the man who had left such a lasting impression. Mark, I've had a crush on you for 5 years. That first encounter, it planted a seed in my heart. I never forgot you. Mark stiffened. Then a smile touched his lips. It wasn't just him. She felt it too. Why didn't you wait for me? How could I know you'd come back? What if it was just wishful thinking? She murmured. He held her close. Their hearts, finally, were drawing near. 6 months later, they were married in a grand ceremony, a testament to their happiness. After their wedding night, he realized she was completely his, and the pride he felt was immeasurable.